Imagine squeezing lemon juice directly into your own eyes, day after day, just so you can harvest your tears for a science experiment.
Right. And then, when your own eyes run dry, you resort to paying the laboratory technicians 3 pence a pop to just cry into a vial for you.
Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we are pulling from a massive, incredibly detailed Wikipedia article covering the life and, well, the scientific contributions of Sir Alexander Fleming.
The penicillin guy.
Exactly. You probably know him as the guy who discovered penicillin by accident.
Mm-hmm.
But our mission today is to totally dismantle that Hollywood myth. That one of the lone genius in a spotless laboratory.
Yeah, the reality is, the history of modern medicine is spectacularly messy.
It really is. We're talking about a landscape of discovery that was driven by a completely chaotic desk, a literal drop of snot, and this bizarre string of coincidences that, against all odds, revolutionized human health.
It is a far more fascinating narrative than the textbook summary, really. When you actually look at the source material, it's a story about the raw power of observation, the absolute non-negotiable necessity of teamwork, and the very real danger of scientific dogma blinding people to the truth.
So before Alexander Fleming could leave out the world's most famous Petri dish, he had to actually get into a lab in the first place.
Yeah.
And his path there was driven by some surprisingly trivial reasons.
Yeah, he didn't start out with this burning childhood passion to cure disease.
Not at all. He actually worked in a shipping office for 4 years.
A completely ordinary beginning.
Right. And he only went to medical school, specifically St. Mary's Hospital Medical School in London, because he inherited a little bit of money from an uncle.
Wow.
His older brother, who was already a physician, essentially nudged him and was like, you should do this too. So he goes. But then he only joins the research department at St. Mary's because of a rifle club.
I love this detail. This is one of those historical pivots that literally changes the world.
It really is.
Yeah.
So Fleming was a private in the London Scottish Regiment and just an exceptional shot. The captain of the medical school's rifle club wanted to keep Fleming on the shooting team, so they could keep winning competitions.
Obviously.
So to keep him around after his basic medical training, the captain suggested Fleming take a job in the research department as an assistant bacteriologist.
Under Sir Almroth, right?
Exactly. Millions of lives eventually saved because a guy wanted to win a local shooting match.
It's crazy, but the critical turning point actually happens once he's in that research role, specifically when World War I breaks out.
Right.
Fleming serves in battlefield hospitals on the Western Front in France, and he encounters his first major scientific puzzle.
Because the standard medical treatment at the time for infected wounds was chemical antiseptics, like carbolic acid. But Fleming observes that the soldiers are still dying of sepsis.
Yeah, and not just dying of it. He starts to suspect that antiseptics are actually killing more soldiers than the infections themselves.
Which is wild.
It was a huge radical departure from the prevailing dogma. The established logic was simple antiseptics kill bacteria, therefore pour them into the wound.
Makes sense on paper.
Right. But Fleming used his own glass-blowing skills to create these intricate models of deep, jagged shrapnel wounds to prove the underlying mechanism of why this standard treatment was failing so badly.
But wait, if the antiseptics were killing the soldiers or at least failing to stop the infections, why couldn't the frontline doctors see that happening in real time? Why just keep pouring it in?
Well, because on the surface level, it really looked like it was working. If you put an antiseptic on a flat petri dish or like a shallow scratch, it destroys the bacteria.
Okay.
But a deep artillery wound is full of crevices and necrotic tissue. The dangerous anaerobic bacteria, the ones that thrive without oxygen, they were sheltered deep inside those pockets.
Oh, so the antiseptic liquid never physically reached them.
Exactly. The bacteria survive.
But why did Fleming say the treatment was actually making things worse, like actively worse?
Because while the antiseptic couldn't reach the deep bacteria, it was easily reaching and destroying the body's own beneficial protective agents.
The white blood cells.
Precisely. The immune system was rushing to the site of the wound to fight the infection, and the doctors were just pouring in a chemical that annihilated the immune cells much faster than it killed the bacteria.
It's like using a flamethrower to kill a few weeds, but you end up burning down the fence that was actually keeping the wild animals out. You are actively destroying the very defenses you need to win the battle.
That is the perfect way to look at it. And this battlefield trauma fundamentally changed how Fleming viewed medicine.
His boss supported him, right? Almroth, right?
He did. But the vast majority of Army physicians completely ignored him. They just kept pouring antiseptics into wounds. And that frustration shifted Fleming's entire scientific philosophy. He realized you can't just dump poison into the body. You have to understand, preserve, and support the body's natural defenses.
Which brings us back to his famously untidy habits. Because one of his colleagues later noted that if Fleming had been a tidy researcher, he never would have made his two great discoveries.
Yeah, a meticulous researcher sterilizes and throws away contaminated samples immediately.
But Fleming let them sit around just to see what would happen.
A habit of passive observation that would pay off immensely.
So in late 1921, this untidiness combined with his new obsession with natural defenses leads to his first breakthrough. He was suffering from a heavy head cold.
The acute coryza.
Yes, exactly. He's working with the agar plates, culturing bacteria, and a drop of his own nasal mucus drips from his nose straight onto a plate.
Gross, but incredibly lucky.
Totally. And instead of tossing this contaminated sample into the wash, he just leaves it on the bench.
And when he checks it later, he captures the body's natural defense mechanism visually.
Surrounding the exact area where the mucus landed, there's this clear, transparent circle. The opaque colonies of bacteria in that zone had been completely destroyed, like dissolved.
He realizes there is an active enzyme in the mucus. He names it Lysozyme. And because he's looking for the body's natural defenses, he starts testing everything to see where else this enzyme exists.
Sputum, blood plasma, egg whites.
And, as we mentioned at the start, tears. That's why he and his colleague Allison were squeezing lemons into their eyes and literally paying lab techs for teardrops.
I just can't get over that image.
Yeah.
But they proved that lysozyme is essentially a natural, invisible shield. It's an antimicrobial protein that forms a core part of our innate immune system.
Right.
So Fleming writes up a detailed paper he presents to the Medical Research Club in the following year to the highly prestigious Royal Society. And he is met with absolute, deafening silence.
Complete apathy from the greatest scientific minds of the era.
I find this baffling. Like, he proves the human body secretes its own bacteria-dissolving fluid, and the top scientists literally just stare at him and shrug. How do they miss the magnitude of this?
It really comes down to the mechanism of the enzyme itself. Lysozyme is incredibly effective at breaking down the cell walls of harmless, everyday airborne bacteria.
Okay.
But it doesn't do much against the highly pathogenic bacteria, the terrifying ones that cause severe lethal diseases like syphilis or typhoid.
Oh, so because it didn't cure the big, scary plagues, they viewed it as basically a party trick.
Precisely. The scientific community at the time was hunting for a magic bullet to cure lethal infections. Because lysozyme didn't do that, they lacked the biological imagination to see its broader significance.
They dismissed it as a minor biological curiosity.
Yeah, Fleming knew how important it was. I mean, he stated plainly in a 1932 address that its role in natural immunity was totally underappreciated, but he essentially had to bear the disappointment and just return to his messy bench.
And then 7 years later, in 1928, history repeats itself. It is another messy mistake, another miraculous observation, and another brutal uphill battle to get the scientific establishment to actually pay attention.
The famous mold.
September 3, 1928. Fleming returns to St. Mary's from a family holiday in Suffolk. Before he left, he had inoculated several plates with Staphylococcus.
And for context, Staphylococcus are ubiquitous bacteria. They live on human skin harmlessly most of the time. But if they enter the bloodstream through a wound, they can cause lethal systemic infections.
Right. So Fleming had just left these plates sitting on a bench in the corner of his lab. He comes back, sorts through the stack, and finds one of the cultures is contaminated with a fungus.
But just like with the snot in 1921, the staph colonies immediately surrounding the fungus have been destroyed.
And his reaction to discovering the single greatest weapon ever found against disease was just this massive understatement. He just looks at the clear ring on the plate and mutters, "That's funny."
It's so iconic. His former assistant, Merlin Price, happened to be in the room and had to explicitly remind him, that's how you discovered lysozyme.
It was the exact same visual pattern, a clear ring of death for the bacteria. Fleming identifies the mold, which we now know as Penicillin rubens, and he realizes it secretes a powerful antibacterial substance into the agar.
And he initially just calls it mold juice.
Mold juice. He officially names the active substance penicillin in 1929, and he starts testing its limits. He finds it easily destroys the pathogens that cause scarlet fever, pneumonia, meningitis, and diphtheria.
But it's selective.
Right. It specifically targets what biologists call gram-positive bacteria, though it doesn't work on gram-negative ones like typhoid.
Which is a crucial distinction regarding how penicillin actually works. The mechanism is fascinating. Penicillin doesn't just poison bacteria, it inhibits cell wall synthesis.
Oh, interesting.
It's like sneaking onto a construction site and stealing the mortar from the bricklayers. As the bacteria try to grow and divide, they can't build a stable wall, so they literally burst open and die under their own internal pressure.
That makes a lot of sense. But why wouldn't it work on the gram-negative bacteria?
Because gram-negative bacteria have an extra structural feature. They have an outer lipid membrane that acts like a highly selective shield. The penicillin molecules physically cannot penetrate that fatty outer layer to get to the cell wall machinery underneath.
Got it. So it's incredibly powerful, but selective. He essentially discovers a medical superpower in the equivalent of a forgotten Tupperware container in the back of the fridge.
Exactly.
But he runs into a massive wall. Just like with Lysozyme, when he presents his findings on penicillin in 1929, the establishment shrugs again.
Yeah, Henry Dale, who chaired the meeting, later admitted he didn't sense any striking point of importance whatsoever.
Unbelievable. And this brings us to a major historical myth that the source material goes out of its way to debunk. There is this popular assertion that Fleming, just discouraged by the apathy, gave up on penicillin in the 1930s.
Yeah, the source explicitly refutes that. He did not abandon it. He kept cultivating that original mold strain for 12 straight years. Wow. He was constantly begging chemists to help him. He even used the crude, unpurified mold juice successfully to cure localized infections. In 1932, he cured a severe eye infection, a terrible case of conjunctivitis in a medical student named Keith Bernard Rogers.
And here we have another bizarre historical coincidence.
Yes, Rogers happened to be the captain of the London University rifle team.
The Rifle Club narrative strikes again.
I know. Fleming managed to cure his eye just in time for an inter-hospital shooting match.
It's an amazing detail. But the eye infection highlights the core problem. Curing a surface infection with crude mold juice is one thing. But to treat a systemic internal infection like pneumonia or sepsis, you have to inject it into the bloodstream.
And to do that, you need a highly purified, stable, concentrated powder. Fleming was a brilliant bacteriologist, but he was not a chemist.
Right. He didn't have the technical vocabulary or the laboratory tools to isolate the active compound. The penicillin molecule is incredibly fragile, isn't it?
Extremely. It breaks down almost instantly if the temperature or acidity isn't perfectly balanced.
So this is the 12-year bottleneck.
Yeah, what we're seeing here is the concept of the prepared mind pushed to its absolute limit. The mold spores that drifted onto his plate likely blew in from a lab directly downstairs that studied allergenic fungi.
Oh, wow.
Anyone else would have thrown the plate in the wash. Only Fleming, because of his deep background studying the exact same visual pattern with Lysozyme, had the unique mental framework to recognize that a clear ring meant salvation, not just contamination.
He kept the flame alive for over a decade, but he needed a team of specialized chemists to actually build the engine.
Which shifts the story to 1940 to the Sir William Dunn School of Pathology at Oxford University. A team led by Howard Florey and Ernst Chain are actively searching for interesting antibacterial substances to study.
They stumble upon Fleming's old 1929 paper.
Exactly. They start cultivating the mold. And when Ernst Chain heard that Alexander Fleming was actually traveling from London to visit their Oxford lab, his reaction was complete shock. He famously blurted out, "Good God, I thought he was dead."
Because the paper was from more than 10 years earlier.
Right. That's how isolated Fleming had been. But this Oxford team, which included Florey, Chain, Norman Heatley, and Edward Abraham, they are the ones who finally cracked the chemical code that eluded Fleming.
And we have to give immense credit to Norman Heatley here, because the chemistry he developed is just brilliant.
It really is. The central problem was extracting the fragile penicillin out of these large vats of watery mold juice without destroying it. Heatley figured out a mechanism called a reverse acidity extraction.
Okay, wait, so how does that actually work?
It's all about manipulating the electrical charge of the molecule. Heatley discovered that if he lowered the pH of the mold juice, making it highly acidic, it changed the solubility of the penicillin.
Okay.
In that acidic state, he could extract the penicillin out of the water and pull it into an organic solvent, specifically ether.
Okay, so now you have penicillin trapped in ether, leaving all the watery impurities behind. But, I mean, you can't inject ether into a human being.
Exactly. So Heatley runs the process in reverse. Once the penicillin is in the ether, he raises the pH again, making it alkaline, using a buffer solution.
Ah.
This alters the charge of the molecule one more time, pulling the now purified penicillin out of the ether and back into water. From there, they could freeze-dry it into a stable, pure brown, and eventually yellow powder.
And then Edward Abraham worked out the structural formula. That is just an incredible feat of bioengineering.
Truly.
So by 1942, they finally have a pure sample ready for human use. And this leads to one of the most dramatic medical interventions in history. In August 1942, a man named Harry Lambert is lying in a ward at St. Mary's Hospital, dying of streptococcal meningitis.
The bacteria have infected the lining of his brain and spinal cord.
Yeah, Fleming has tried every known treatment. Nothing is working. The man is slipping into a coma.
It is a death sentence.
Out of sheer desperation, Fleming calls Howard Florey at Oxford and begs for the newly isolated, highly precious penicillin sample. Florey agrees and sends it to London.
And because Lambert's infection is in the central nervous system, Fleming makes a radical decision.
He injects the purified penicillin directly into Lambert's spinal canal.
The clinical result was unprecedented.
The very next day, Lambert regains consciousness and shows massive improvement. Within a week, he is completely, remarkably cured. He walks out of the hospital.
And here is where the science takes a sharp, weird turn into public relations.
Oh, yeah. The British media gets wind of this miraculous cure of a dying man. The Times publishes a glowing front-page story about it, but they don't mention Florey, Chain, Heatley, or the Oxford team at all.
Not a single word about them.
Howard Florey, being this very strict traditional academic, had expressly prohibited his team from speaking to the press. He thought media coverage was unseemly for serious scientists.
So the reporters simply went to St. Mary's, found Alexander Fleming, and focused the entire spotlight on him. It was the birth of what Fleming himself modestly called the Fleming myth.
The press just painted him as the lone savior who single-handedly conquered infection from start to finish. And, that hunger for a hero spawned even wilder myths later on.
Oh, the Churchill story.
Yes, there's a widespread fable that Fleming's father saved a young Winston Churchill from drowning in a bog. Supposedly, Churchill's wealthy father paid for Fleming's medical education in gratitude. And then, as fate would have it, Fleming later saved Prime Minister Winston Churchill's life with penicillin during World War II.
It is a fantastic story, and it is entirely false from top to bottom.
Complete fabrication. Fleming himself publicly dismissed it as a wondrous fable. For the record, when Churchill fell ill during the war, he was actually saved by a totally different drug called M&B 693.
But the public ate these stories up. They wanted the myth.
Why do you think the public and the media are so eager to believe in the lone genius's fable instead of, the messy reality of teamwork?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture and look at the historical context, you can understand why. It's 1942. Great Britain is enduring the darkest, most exhausting days of World War II.
That's true.
The public is traumatized by mass casualties. They are desperate for a singular, shining hero who has independently conquered death itself. The messy reality, a dozen biochemists endlessly arguing over acidity levels, ether extractions, and carbon rings in a cramped Oxford laboratory, it just doesn't fit the archetype of the hero's journey.
They wanted a wizard, not an engineering committee.
Exactly. But the reality of the engineering committee is what actually saved the world. Sir Henry Harris, a later Oxford pathologist, summed up the reality perfectly. He stated, without Fleming, no Chain; without Chain, no Florey; without Florey, no Heatley; without Heatley, no penicillin.
An unbreakable chain of observation and chemical translation, and that collaboration had to go global immediately to meet the demands of the war.
Because British industry was being bombed by the Luftwaffe.
Right. So Florey and Heatley took the mold to the United States. By D-Day in 1944, American and British companies had successfully scaled up deep tank fermentation, producing enough penicillin to treat all the wounded Allied troops landing in Normandy. It was saving thousands of lives every single week.
But, just as this monumental miracle drug was finally reaching the masses, Fleming was already looking over the horizon. And he was deeply troubled by how human nature might ruin it.
He was furious when he discovered the business side of things, actually. In 1944, he finds out that American manufacturers are actively patenting the mass production methods.
He's livid.
He stated on the record, "I found penicillin and have given it free for the benefit of humanity. Why should it become a profit-making monopoly of manufacturers in another country?"
He fundamentally viewed penicillin as a gift to the species, not a commodity to be hoarded, and that underlying belief tied directly into a much darker fear about how the drug would be utilized by the public.
Which brings us to 1945. Fleming is awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, sharing it rightfully with Florey and Chain.
But instead of just taking a victory lap at the podium, Fleming uses his Nobel lecture to issue a chilling, highly accurate warning about antibiotic resistance.
Keep in mind, he had already observed in his own laboratory years earlier that Staphylococcus bacteria could mutate and develop resistance if they were exposed to small, non-lethal doses of penicillin.
Right. He understood the evolutionary mechanism perfectly. During his speech, he tells a Nobel audience that there is a massive danger that an ignorant man might easily underdose himself.
Think about this in a modern context for a second. Think about the last time you were prescribed antibiotics, a Z-Pak, for example. You take it for 3 days, your throat feels better, and you decide to stop taking the pills, leaving a few in the bottle.
Fleming was talking directly about that exact behavior in 1945. By stopping early, you expose the bacteria in your body to a non-lethal quantity of the drug. The weak bacteria die, but the strongest ones survive.
You essentially educate the surviving microbes to resist the drug.
And he did not mince words regarding the ethics of that behavior. He explicitly stated in that lecture that a thoughtless person playing with penicillin treatments is morally responsible for the death of the person who finally succumbs to an infection from that newly resistant mutant organism.
It is a profound, terrifying concept. He was explaining the exact mechanism of superbugs decades before hospital-acquired MRSA became a global crisis.
He understood that a miracle drug is only as effective as the responsibility of the society using it. It's a biological contract. If we abuse the drug through ignorance or impatience, biology will adapt and the miracle will simply stop working.
It forces us to completely reevaluate how we view medical progress. We treat antibiotics like magical consumer products, assuming science will always just invent another one when the old one stops working.
But Fleming saw the biological limits of that arrogance from day one.
It really is a wild journey to trace back from that warning. We started by looking at how an arbitrary desire to win a rifle club competition put a young Alexander Fleming into a research lab. That arbitrary choice placed him on the battlefields of World War I, where the horror of watching antiseptics destroy soldiers' immune systems taught him to respect the body's natural defenses. And because he respected those defenses, he paid attention when a drop of his own nasal mucus dissolved bacteria on a messy desk.
The prepared mind in action.
Exactly. And because he had trained his mind to see that specific pattern, he recognized it instantly when a stray mold spore blew through his window 7 years later. He preserved that mold juice against a decade of scientific apathy. The Oxford chemists finally built the chemical engine to purify it, and the world stepped out of the dark ages of infection and into the dawn of modern antibiotics.
And yet, considering everything we've unpacked today, Fleming's greatest legacy isn't just the mold he found on that unwashed plate. It's the stark fragility of the miracle he warned us about. It makes you wonder, if the greatest medical victory in human history can be jeopardized simply by human impatience and a few skipped pills, what other incredible technological or medical miracles are we currently taking for granted and quietly unraveling today?